Good evening to one and all. I hope you're all well and looking forward to some fine theatre tonight. I am Hooter, the narrator, your host for tonight's fine festivities. As some of you may have deduced, tonight's titillation will be from the very first chapter of the very first adventure starring those two much beloved crime fighters, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author, published A Study in Scarlet in 1887, 6 years after the events in the novel. And after publication, what happened? Diddly squat. Nothing. Not a sod. The readers were, apparently, unimpressed. They were unaware of the great literary legacy carefully unfolding before their eyes. History was being made, and they didn't give a toss. Ha, Victorians! Ha, dullards! How wrong they were! And how right we are! So let's begin our revelling in this most glorious of tales. But first, some introductions. On my right, sound-boothed and raring to go, is a bird of 1,000 voices, and none of them her own, our esteemed sound wizard, Harpo. To my left is the gun-fighting, chain-smoking, bulldogging, ex-military medical practitioner, Dr. John H. Watson. To his left is the story's crucial bridging character, Stamford.
Bless all you, except the cats.
And now, let's all be quiet, as I begin a laborious, but necessary, exposition. In 1878, John Watson received his Doctor of Medicine degree from the University of London. Then proceeded to Netley Hospital to undertake a preparatory course for army surgeons. Having completed his studies there, he was duly attached to the 5th Northumberland Fusiliers as an assistant surgeon. His regiment was stationed in India at the time. But, before he could meet up with it, the Second Afghan War had broken out. On landing at Bombay, he learned that his corps had advanced through the passes and was already deep in the enemy's country. Watson followed, with many other officers who were in the same situation, and succeeded in reaching Kandahar in safety, where he found his regiment, and at once entered upon his new duties. The campaign brought honours and promotion to many, but for Watson it had nothing but misfortune and disaster. He was removed from his brigade and attached to the Berkshires, with whom he served at the fatal Battle of Maiwand. There he was struck on the shoulder by a Giselle bullet, which shattered the bone and grazed the subclavian artery. He would have fallen into the clutches of the murderous Ghazis had it not been for the devotion and courage shown by Murray, his orderly, who threw him across a pack horse, and succeeded in bringing him safely to the British lines. Worn with pain, and weak from the prolonged hardships which he had undergone, he was removed, with a great train of wounded sufferers, to the base hospital at Peshawar. Here he rallied. He had already improved so far as to be able to walk about the wards, and even to bask a little upon the veranda, when he was struck down by enteric fever, spit upon the ground. That curse of our Indian possessions. For months his life hung in the balance. And when, at last, the fever had broken, his body weak and emaciated, a medical board determined that not a day should be lost in sending him back to England. He was dispatched, accordingly, in the troop ship Florence and landed a month later on Portsmouth jetty, with his health irretrievably ruined, but with permission from the paternal government to spend the next 9 months in attempting to improve it. He had neither kith nor kin in England and was therefore as free as air, or as free as an income of 11 shillings and sixpence a day will permit a man to be. Under such circumstances, he naturally gravitated towards London, that great, disgusting, repulsive, nauseating, stomach-churning cesspool of a place into which all the loungers and idlers of the empire are irresistibly drained. There he stayed for some time at a private hotel in the Strand, leading a comfortless, meaningless existence, and spending such money as he had, considerably more freely than he ought. So alarming did the state of his finances become, that he soon realized that he must either leave the metropolis and rusticate somewhere in the country, or that he must make a complete alteration in his style of living. Choosing the latter alternative, he began by making up his mind to leave the hotel, and to take up quarters in some less pretentious and less expensive domicile. On the very day that he had come to this conclusion, and the very moment he was standing at the Criterion bar, someone tapped him on the shoulder, and turning around he recognized young Stamford, who had been a dresser under Watson at Bath's. The sight of a young, virile, friendly face in the great wilderness of London was a pleasant thing indeed for this lonely man. Although, in the good old days, Stamford had never been a particularly close crony of Watson's, but now, Watson hailed him with enthusiasm, and young Stamford, in his turn, appeared to be delighted to see Watson.
Oh, Stamford.
Watson.
Oh, Stamford.
Watson.
Oh, Stamford.
In the exuberance of Watson's joy, Watson asked Stamford to lunch with him at the Holborn.
Stamford. Oh, Stamford. Will you have lunch with me at the Holborn?
Yes, sir. I will, sir. Watson, I will.
Watson and Stamford started off together in a hansom towards the Holborn restaurant.
Whatever have you been doing with yourself, Watson?
He asked in undisguised wonder, as they rattled through the crowded London streets.
You're as thin as a lath and as brown as a nut.
Watson recounted his life story, which we've edited out because it doesn't have Sherlock Holmes in it. Let's move on to the restaurant.
Poor devil. What a pitiful life story you have. So, what are you up to now?
Looking for lodgings. I'm trying to solve the problem as to whether it is possible to get comfortable rooms at a reasonable price.
That's a strange thing. You are the second man today to use that expression around me.
Oh. And who was the first?
A fellow who is working at the chemical laboratory up at the hospital. He was bemoaning to himself this morning because he could not get someone to go halves with him in some nice rooms he had found, and which were too much for his purse.
By Jove. If he really wants someone to share the rooms and the expenses, then I'm the very man for him. I prefer having a partner than being alone.
Young Stamford looked rather strangely at Watson.
You don't know the man they call Sherlock Holmes. Perhaps you wouldn't care for him as a constant companion.
I need more than a one-night stand, my good fellow. Then again, I suppose you're right. I don't want to get involved with any high-maintenance flatmates. Being called into the police station at ungodly hours is not for me. So, thanks anyway. I guess I'll look elsewhere. Then again, why'd you say that? What's there against him?
Oh, I didn't say there was anything against him. He is a little queer. Cough. In his ideas. I mean, he's an enthusiast in some branches of science. So, as far as I know, he's a decent fellow enough.
A medical student, I suppose.
No, I have no idea what he intends to go in for. I believe he is well up in anatomy, and he is a first-class chemist, but, as far as I know, he has never taken out any systematic medical classes. His studies are very desultory and eccentric, but he has amassed a lot of out-of-the-way knowledge which can astonish his professors.
Did you never ask him what he was not going in for?
No, he is not a man that's easy to draw out. Though, he can be communicative enough, when the fancy seizes him.
Well then, I should like to meet him. If I am to lodge with anyone, I should prefer a man of studious and quiet habits. I'm not strong enough yet to stand much noise or excitement. I've had enough of both in Afghanistan to last me the remainder of my natural existence. How can I meet this friend of yours?
He is sure to be at the laboratory. He either avoids the place for weeks, or else he works there from morning to night. If you like, we shall drive round together after luncheon.
Certainly.
After leaving Hoban, the two made their way to the hospital where Stamford gave Watson a few more particulars about the gentleman whom Watson proposed to take as a fellow lodger.
You mustn't blame me if you don't get on with him. I know nothing more of him than I have learned from meeting him occasionally in the laboratory. You proposed this arrangement, so you mustn't hold me responsible.
If we don't get on, it will be easy to part company. It seems to me, Stanford, that you have some reason for washing your hands of the matter. Is this fellow's temperament so formidable, or what is it? Please, don't be mealy-mouthed about it.
It's not easy to express the inexpressible. Snigger snigger. Holmes is a little too scientific for my tastes. It approaches cold-bloodedness. I could imagine him giving a friend a little pinch of the latest vegetable alkaloid. Not out of malevolence, you understand, but simply out of a spirit of inquiry in order to have an accurate idea of the effects. To do him justice, I think that he would take it himself with the same readiness. He appears to have a passion for definite and exact knowledge.
Very right too. Nothing wrong with incapacitating people with brain-altering drugs if it suits your agenda.
Maybe. But it may be pushed to excess. I mean, when it comes to beating the subjects in the dissecting rooms with a stick, it is certainly taking a rather bizarre shape.
You don't say. Beating the subjects, with a stick. Sounds like my kind of flatmate.
Yes, with a stick, to verify how far bruises may be produced after death. I saw him at it with my own eyes.
Ha ha, voyeurism. Love it. Cough. I mean, you say he's not a medical student.
Yes, I did. No, he's not. Heaven knows what the object of his studies are.
Let's see. A man bludgeoning corpses with a stick. Sounds like women's studies.
Maybe. Anyway, here we are. You can form your own impressions of him.
The two turned down a narrow lane and passed through a small side door, which opened into a wing of the great hospital. It was familiar ground to Watson, and he needed no guiding as they ascended the bleak stone staircase and made their way down the long corridor with its vista of whitewashed walls and dun-coloured doors. Near the further end, a low arched passage branched away from it and led to the chemical laboratory. This was a lofty chamber, lined and littered with countless bottles. Broad, low tables were scattered about, which bristled with retorts, test tubes, and little Bunsen lamps, with their blue, flickering flames. There was only one student in the room, who was bending over a distant table absorbed in his work. Inside the chemical laboratory, a lone figure was absorbed in his work. At the sound of Watson's and Stamford's approaching steps, the mysterious figure sprang to his feet with a cry of pleasure.
I found it. I found it.
Ladies and gentlemen, Sherlock Holmes.
which is precipitated by hemoglobin, and by nothing else.
Well done, sir. Mr. Sherlock Holmes, meet Dr. Watson.
How are you? You have been in Afghanistan, I perceive.
I say, astonished, how on earth did you know that?
Never mind that. The question now is about hemoglobin. No doubt you see the significance of this discovery of mine.
It is interesting, chemically, no doubt. But, practically,
Why, man, it is the most practical medical legal discovery for years. Don't you see that it gives us an infallible test for blood stains? Come over here now.
Seizing Watson by the coat sleeve in his eagerness, Sherlock drew Watson over to the table at which he had been working.
Let us have some fresh blood.
Digging a long bodkin into his finger, Sherlock drew off the resulting drop of blood into a chemical pipette.
Now, I add this small quantity of blood to a liter of water. You perceive that the resulting mixture has the appearance of pure water. The proportion of blood cannot be more than 1 in a million. I have no doubt, however, that we shall be able to obtain the characteristic reaction.
As he spoke, he threw into the vessel a few white crystals, and then added some drops of a transparent fluid. In an instant the contents assumed a dull mahogany color, and a brownish dust was precipitated to the bottom of the glass jar.
Ha, what do you think of that?
it seems to be a very delicate test.
Beautiful, beautiful. The old G, U, A, I, A test was very clumsy and uncertain. So is the microscopic examination for blood corpuscles. The latter is valueless if the stains are a few hours old. Now, this test appears to act as well whether the blood is old or new. Had this test been invented beforehand, there would be hundreds of men who are now walking the earth that would have long ago paid the penalty for their crimes.
Indeed.
Criminal cases are continually hinging upon that one point. A man is suspected of a crime, months perhaps after it has been committed. His linen or clothes are examined, and brownish stains discovered upon them. Are they blood stains, or mud stains, or rust stains, or fruit stains, or what are they? That is a question which has puzzled many an expert. And why? Because there was no reliable test. Now we have the Sherlock Holmes test, and there will no longer be any difficulty.
His eyes glittered as he spoke, and he put his hand over his heart and bowed as if to some applauding crowd conjured up by his imagination.
I am surprised by your enthusiasm. Of course, you are to be congratulated.
There was the case of von Biss, Koff, at Frankfurt last year. He would certainly have been hung had this test been in existence. Then there was Mason of Bradford, and the notorious Muller, and Lee, V. of Montpellier, and Samson of New Orleans. I could name a score of cases in which it would have been decisive.
You seem to be a working calendar of crime, chuckle chuckle. You might start a blog along those lines. Call it, the police news of the past.
Very interesting reading it might be too.
Sherlock is diligently sticking a small piece of plaster over the prick on his finger.
I have to be careful, for I dabble with poisons a good deal.
Sherlock held out his hand as he spoke, and you could notice that it was all mottled over with similar pieces of plaster and discolored with strong acids.
We came here on business. My friend here wants to take diggings, and as you were complaining that you couldn't get anyone to go halves with you, I thought I'd better bring you two together.
I have my eye on a suite in Baker Street, which would suit us down to the ground. You don't mind the smell of strong tobacco, I hope.
I always smoke ships, myself.
That's good enough. I generally have chemicals about, and occasionally do experiments. Would that annoy you?
By no means.
Let me see, what are my other shortcomings? I get in the dumps at times, and don't open my mouth for days on end. You mustn't think I'm sulky when I do that. Just leave me alone and I'll soon be right. What have you to confess now? It's just as well for two fellows to know the worst of one another before they begin to live together.
Gay marriages are so simple. In fact, all marriages should be as simple as this.
I laugh at your cross-examination, ha ha ha. Well, to answer you. I keep a bullpup, and I object to Rose because my nerves are shaken, and I get up at all sorts of ungodly hours, and I am extremely lazy. I have another set of vices when I'm well, but those are the principal ones at present.
Do you include violin playing in your category of Rose?
It depends upon the player. A well-played violin is a treat for the gods. A badly played one.
Oh, that's all right. I laugh merrily, ho ho ho. I think we may consider the thing as settled, that is, if the rooms are agreeable to you.
When shall we see them?
Call for me here at noon tomorrow, and we'll go together and settle everything.
All right, noon exactly.
Watson and Stamford left Sherlock to work amongst his chemicals. On the way to Watson's hotel room, Watson suddenly stopped and turned to Stamford.
By the way, how the deuce did he know that I had come from Afghanistan?
That's just his little peculiarity. A good many people have wanted to know how he finds things out.
Oh. A mystery is it? This is very piquant. I am much obliged to you for bringing us together. The proper study of mankind is man, you know.
Then you must study him. You will find him a knotty problem though. I'll wager he learns more about you than you about him. Have a good journey.
Goodbye.
Watson continued his stroll on towards his hotel room, considerably interested in his new acquaintance. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the end of Chapter 1. You've been a wonderful, responsive audience. Please watch and listen to public notice at the end of this video. We look forward to your company at our next installment of A Study in Scarlet. Good night and stay safe.